everyone and welcome back to a new video. Today I'm going to be making a more simple Hollow Knight Lightbox. So I've had a few people ask for a more simple Lightbox so they can follow along, and I also had someone ask for the Blue Lake scene with Quirrell, so I thought I'd combine the two and make it into one Lightbox. I've actually been planning on doing this scene for a while, but I always put it off because of how simple it is, because for me the more detailed the Lightbox, the more fun. So for this project, I cut the papers that I will use in half to create a smaller Lightbox and hopefully make it a bit more challenging. The size of the paper that I'm using is 8.5 by 5.5 inches with a 1/2 inch border on all sides. Then I take my reference photo and I flip it so that when I cut the layers backwards and then flip it back, the ugly pencil marks will be on the back side and they won't show and ruin the Lightbox. And with everything prepped and ready to go, let's just jump right into it. So the first layer I worked on is the front silhouettes, because those are very simple and they will help me plan things out later on. This layer just has some rocks in the foreground and some stalactites from the ceiling, and that's pretty much it, so I just draw and cut out the shapes, and since they're silhouettes I don't need to go into details, so that was pretty easy. Then I use this layer to plan out the main layer with Quirrell and the knights sitting next to each other. And honestly, I never really cared for Quirrell when I played the game for the first time. Like, I didn't dislike him, but I cared for other NPCs more. But when I looked more into the lore and the story, I kind of grew to like him. And this last interaction with him after his whole arc is over is pretty sad. Like, I think he just dies after you leave the room and come back, so that's pretty sad. I think it's cool how he helps you in the fight against Umu, and how he's just always around exploring the world and being drawn to like an unknown force. And then after you find Monomon, he feels at peace because he's just fulfilled his life's desire, I guess? I don't know. But overall, I think that story arc is pretty cool. But anyways, I drew and I cut everything out, and for some extra details, I cut along the line work that I drew, and then when the light will shine through those cuts, it will act as kind of like a line work and it'll just help you see what it's actually supposed to be, so that's why I do that. Then I made a second pair of arms and legs and eyes to layer onto the main layer, and just to make those areas a bit darker. I also cut a little extra piece for the knight's body that's peeking out under his cloak, just, you know, to darken that part again. Then I just go and I glue these pieces in their respective places. Then I take this layer and I use it as a guide for my next layer. So there are a bunch of seashells by the Blue Lake, which give the place a very beachy feel, even though it's not a beach, it's a lake, but I do like that element. Like, I like how much variety this game has in the scenery, even though it's all underground, like with bugs. I like that it can incorporate different kinds of environments and feels all in one world. For example, you have Crystal Peak, which represents like the cavey environment. Then you have the Howling Cliffs in Kingdom's Edge, which is like mountainous cliffs. Then you have Green Path in Queen's Garden, which is like really lush vegetation. And then the Blue Lake is like a beach. So I think that's pretty cool how they just incorporate everything and it still feels very natural and organic. But yeah, I just continue on with the scenery. There are these little bushy plants here and there, and then just more seashells. And for the details on the bushes, I cut little V-shapes to look like branches and leaves. It's kind of a cartoony way of showing it, but I think it works. And since this project is on the more simple side, I wanted it to have a lot of depth, so I end up adding a lot of just blank layers in between parts to give it more space and depth. And up next is the background, and luckily it's pretty simple. It just basically consists of rounded rocks. So I just get started on that, and I like to draw everything out exactly how I want it, so that when I cut it out, I just have to cut along the lines I drew, so that way it's a lot simpler than just trying to freehand everything, and that's just what I did for these rocks. I made 3 layers of this rocky wall, and these are pretty much the same. Just as I work my way further back, I cut a few more holes out of sight and just to let more light through so the front won't end up being too dark. And it's a little tricky to cut along all these lines without mistakes, because one little slip and then you cut out a whole section of rocks and you mess up the whole layer. But it happened to me once and it wasn't tragic, so I just kept it in and it turned out to be fine, so it's not that bad. Then after the 3 layers, I make another layer of stalactites because I see some vaguely in the background, so I thought I'd add it for some more details and just to break up the rocky scenery a bit. Then for the way far background of the blue lake, it's pretty blurry, so it's a little hard to figure out what it's supposed to look like, but there are definitely rocks there, so for the last layer I just add another layer of rocks, but just to cover up this hole, and I leave the rest like open so the light will get through. And now into the fun part, adding all the water in. I went with some tracing paper for the water because I feel like if I would use any thicker paper like sketching paper or just normal paper, it would add up to being too dark after a few layers, so I opted for the super thin paper so you could still, it would be kind of, light and you could still see through. So I just take my tracing paper and I lay it out to where I want it, and then I glue it in place and trim the edges. Then I go and I use this layer to keep things level, and I keep on gluing the paper on most of the layers. I keep it off of a few in the background because I was worried it would still end up being too dark despite the paper being so thin. But yeah, that's basically the last step, and this light box ended up being like 15 layers, which is pretty deep considering the size, so I was really excited about that. And now I start the assembly process by cutting strips of foam board to glue the layers on. So I get started with the back layer and I assemble the light box. And yeah, here it is done. I don't know why, but my camera always has trouble picking up the whitish colors, and the light was very light blue, so it just looked too dark, and I tried to capture it the best I could. But yeah, I'm decently happy with it. It's not my favorite, but it's not bad. I think the water could have looked better, and there was just something about it that's lacking for me, but otherwise I think it's pretty cute. Let me know what you think and what light boxes should I do next. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!